Our first weaving stitch is called Tabby or plain weave, and this is just a very simple over under over under. It can also be helpful if you have a comb as your beater. I don't have one, so I'm just going to use my fingers. This is another reason why having a header bar is helpful, because you can more easily beat your yarn against this header bar. One option is to leave your tails hanging out and then tape them back if this is practice. If you want to take this off later, I recommend weaving in your tails. I'm going to weave my tail around this last warp string and then weave it back in, going opposite. Another option would be actually to start with your tail above so that in your next row you don't have a duplicate. That would look like bringing your weft down and then going back above your first pass. Like this. Be very careful that as you are looping your tail around your warp strings that you're not pulling too tight. You don't want to have any uneven tension. You want to keep this last warp string vertical. So leave even a little bit of a loop as you go around your last warp string. Now we're ready for our next pass. Be sure that you pay attention to your previous row. I left off going under, so my next row will go over. Leave a little bit of a loop, then push your weft against your previous row. As I'm running out of yarn, I'm going to weave the tail back in. Sometimes it's nice to actually alternate the sides so that way you don't get extra kind of bulk over here. So I'm actually just going to cut this weft here in the middle. Be very careful that you don't accidentally cut a warp string. And later you can trim up all your tails. My goal is to weave about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of each type of stitch so that I can really see how a bigger amount is going to interact with my warp. Also make sure that you are beating your weft so that you don't have any gaps. You want to push your warp all the way so it's nice and compact and you don't see your warp strings through your weft. I'm going to weave a little bit more of my tabby or plain weave, so I'm going to start here so that I can overlap and weave in my tails. If this is confusing to you, then really you can just leave them all off the sides, But if your goal is to take this off the loom later and you want to have everything nice and neat, then it's good to start practicing how to do that. If you start pulling in on your last warp, you're going to get an effect called hourglassing. So be very careful whenever you are making your next pass to intentionally leave this little loop and not to pull your weft too tightly. If you have any tails that you need to weave in, one option is to weave them in as you are creating your weft. The other option is to weave them on the side of your weft loops and then trim off your extra. I'm actually going to have this one go up a little bit further. I like to stagger how long or short my tails are.